This is Reader's Radar, scanning Indiana's literary journals for outstanding new short stories. In every episode, we talk with one journal's editor about these surprising publications. And you hear a short story recommended by that editor as something special. Reader's Radar is a production of Indiana Public Media and WFIU Public Radio. It's your forecast for great reading ahead. I'm your host and reader, Shane Lauder. Literary journals are a place for fresh voices in fiction, nonfiction, poetry, and visual arts. A Midwestern review is published by undergraduates at DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana, and the quality of its content shines bright on today's radar. I'm on the phone with Samuel Ottman, Associate Professor of English at DePauw and the outgoing faculty advisor for A Midwestern Review. Samuel, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Samuel, tell us about the history of A Midwestern Review.
The Midwestern Review started actually in 1987 as a way for students to write and publish poetry and fiction initially, and then later nonfiction was included. DePauw has a long history of journalism excellence. The DePauw, the student newspapers, is an independent student publication, and many students from the newspaper have gone out to get great jobs at the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post. And so I'm pretty sure there was an intention in the late 80s to bring that kind of attention to literary writing. It's completely run by students. They pick the editors, they pick the photographers, they pick the layout people, they do all of it. The faculty really stand by if there are any personnel issues or any issues getting the publication, the money for the publication, or helping set up readings. I mean, we really stand by almost in an administrative function. It's independent from our purview in that way. We want them to come away understanding a little bit about literary publications.
Now, your own experience as a nonfiction author is impressive. You're an award-winning essayist, and you've been a journalist for several major newspapers. So as a writing teacher, what do you want to communicate to your students, and what do you want to nurture in them?
Because I came through journalism, I always think about the audience and the end result. So I think about the impact of words on readers. I always tell my students, how are the words that you're writing going to impact the reader ultimately? So I tell them it has to start with them, but it has to end for the reader so that the circle is full. So that's how I always talk in my creative writing classes. I talk about ultimately the work starts with them, and then what do they want the reader to take away from the work?
When did you join the faculty at DePauw?
Well, I left newspapers in 2002, in June of 2002, and I was invited for a semester to advise the newspaper and to teach the news writing and editing class in 2003. I was here for 2.5 years, and then I went away and got an MFA in creative writing and came back in 2008. So I've been back full-time since 2008, so it's been a decade now.
What did you see as the possibilities in the journal and in the fact that it was totally produced by undergraduates?
I really love the fact that we have so many things that are driven by students, because in the end, our liberal arts education is about students learning to write, think, and speak for themselves. And so I think that's what I enjoy the most about a Midwestern Review, is that it is very much like the newspaper. The content is controlled by students, so they are empowered.
And how is the review distributed?
It is printed and distributed on campus, in the library, on buildings throughout the campus. We have boxes and boxes of them. They're everywhere.
And when did you first become faculty advisor for the review?
So I did it from the fall of 2017 to the spring of 2018, so just 1 year. I want to stress that I never went to an editorial meeting. The student who was the editor-in-chief was my advisee, so I met with her periodically. She sent me emails, and we talked periodically about the process. But the students meet weekly. They put out a call for content. They read through those. They decide what goes in. They vote, and then they start the production process. So we are not involved as faculty members at all. All we are, we sign the forms, and if there are personnel issues, we intervene on that level. But it is completely done by students. I never went to a meeting.
The students, when they're reading editorial submissions, they're doing that blind, and they're looking at works from other students and from alumni.
It's completely completely intended for students. Sometimes they will allow students from Wabash to submit, or I think there's an Indiana women's prison that can submit. It is intended purely for undergraduates.
Are there any course requirements for students to apply?
So the way it sort of plays out, when people come in as first years and they're interested in creative writing, faculty, we always tell them there's a Midwestern Review. People in creative writing classes announce that you can submit your work. And so the people who are really fired up can go as readers initially as first-year students, and they work their way through the ranks. By the time people work their way up as editor-in-chief, they are already seniors and ready to leave. So there's not a prerequisite to do it, but the way it has worked out is that people kind of start in as first years because it's all voluntary. You see, they get nothing from us. These are people who are highly motivated, so they have their own internal system. There's no requirement from the faculty that they have had a certain number of creative writing classes. It just has worked out that way.
You have mentioned that you've seen the nonfiction writers go on to work in major newspapers. What about fiction or poetry? Have you seen them go on to be published in journals?
We actually have had people who went to school here who went on and got their MFA. Some are teaching. At all ranges, we have people who have gone on to get a PhD in creative writing and go on to publish poetry. We've had many people we've had actually our alums from here to go to the IU program. So they go all over and publish fiction and poetry as well.
Well, from the quality of the piece that you recommended for us today, Midwestern Review is a very special place for new writers. Do you have anything to say about the story, Becoming Caroline by Katrina Iorio? The quality I find wonderful in this piece is the psychological reality of the protagonist, the narrative voice.
I'm always amazed at the quality of the fiction at DePauw. All I can say is it's indicative of the kinds of fiction that we see in our workshops at DePauw. We have a very strong program. What she wrote is pretty indicative of what we want our students to be out there doing.
In a moment, we'll hear Becoming Caroline by Katrina Iorio, published in the spring 2018 edition of A Midwestern Review. IndianaPublicMedia.org is your online station for award-winning news and timeless music, and for stories on the dazzling creativity everywhere in the Hoosier State. Scroll down on our About page for links to archive stories about publishing and interviews with authors of every genre. Hear poetry from Indiana on the Poet's Weave at IndianaPublicMedia.org. And now, Becoming Caroline by Katrina Iorio on Reader's Radar. Sober or fucked up, Carol was the funniest person in the room. Not funniest girl, person. On this particular night, she was only tipsy, and the room wasn't much to be talked about. Just the usual gang, the ones who always went to Luke's house after the basketball games. Carol didn't go to the game, though. Instead, she waited for Lindsay to text her when it was over so she could take a fat nap, catch up on some TV, masturbate, or, quite frankly, do anything else before leaving the comfort of her own home. The fuck am I gonna do with the JV basketball game? I can't even pretend to care, honestly. Her friends didn't bother asking anymore, but it was no harm done. Carol would join them the second the high school sporting event finished, so that they could hang out somewhere outside of that sweaty, overly bright gymnasium that probably had E. coli living on every surface. It was the same gym she spent sixth period in every day, trying to butter up Mrs. K with pleading jokes about her pre-diabetes, only half a lie, so that she didn't have to run the mile. Except that some other place was usually just one of their parents' basements, which didn't harbor E. coli, but quite often harbored cats that made Carol's face puffier than its usual moon shape. It didn't matter, though. Anything was better than that goddamn gym. She finished 2 lukewarm Coors Lights over a game of euchre and was babysitting a third in her left hand. She felt light, and Luke's basement put her at ease. It was the perfect setting for her to test out some brand new material. Okay, so the other day, Linda, the security guard, tried to tell me my shorts were too short before I even walked onto school grounds. Carol started. Lindsay and Sabrina let out a disgusted ugh noise, as if she'd said rancid deli meats instead of Linda. She goes, "Hey, young lady, how long are those shorts of yours? Your dean's gonna be hearing about this one." Carol's bottom lip puffs out and her voice lowers as she imitates the loud and greasy Linda Rizzo from New Jersey. The group loses it. "And so I say, long enough to cover my size 14 ass, Miss Linda. Are you trying to tell a fat girl she can't wear shorts?" The boys cackle when Carol says ass. Carol nods her head slowly before anyone can ask her if she really said that. "Damn, Carol, you're funny and wild. And that imitation is on point." "Oh, fuck, Miss Linda." Carol masks her proud smile by taking a big gulp of Coors. She's still smiling until the hearty yellow liquid hits her insides, filling her stomach so much it barely retreats upon exhalation. "Yep, still tastes like piss." "It's actually Caroline. I go by Caroline now." 1.5 years since graduation, and she was still reminding people of the name change. There weren't too many people from her high school who went to Loyola, and by now, Caroline had mastered the art of not making eye contact to avoid awkward hellos, but every so often someone would catch her off guard and call her by the name that she had burned and buried. Carol. Each correction added that much more uncomfort to the interaction. This one was no different. This guy... was his name Sean or Steve? Or maybe Frank? Looked Carol up and down, cocked his head to the side, and shrugged. "I'll see you around then, Caroline." Caroline didn't watch him walk away, even though she did think he was pretty cute. His acne had cleared up since high school. Instead, she rolled her eyes and then fixed them back onto the online website for Urban Outfitters. The burial of her name did not go unaccompanied. The weight trickled down, Carol withered away, and Caroline never even bothered to look back. Caroline was sophisticated, while Carol unbuttoned the top clasp of her jeans, shamelessly and in public, after a big meal at Noodles & Company with friends. Caroline weighed in at 115 and picked the croutons out of her Caesar salads. Carol had back rolls. Caroline got 300 likes on her Instagram posts regularly. Carol was voted class clown. No one laughed when Caroline stepped onto a treadmill. Instead, they stared, not out of judgment or disgust, but rather infatuation. People didn't laugh at Caroline, but they never really laughed with her either. It didn't bother her, though, because for the first time in her entire life, she loved herself, or at least her exterior. The creation of Caroline did not come without cost. It was long and hard work. At first, Caroline was just a goal of Carol's, out of reach, dreamlike, only mere fantasy. After a shower, Carol would spend hours unwrapping and rewrapping her damp towel on her body in order to properly analyze the dimensions of herself. She'd pinch at the skin that she wanted gone, close her eyes tight, breathe hard, and wait for herself to get hot. It wouldn't be long until her face would grow pink and feverish, a combination of both rosacea and anger. Not long until lame tears fell out of the corners of her eyes and onto her cheeks. This stage, for Carol, was stagnant and demoralizing. The next few stages blended together as Carol became Caroline. First, there were the diets. So many different ones phasing in and out, it was nearly impossible to keep track of them. There was the no-carbs phase, the intermittent fasting phase, the vegan phase, some lasting longer than others, but none lasting more than 2.5 weeks. The solution, after so many had failed her, became restrict until you can't any longer, binge, and then, inevitably, purge. It was the ugliest solution by far, but goddammit, it worked. Carol and Caroline were not planners. And much like one does not plan on becoming overweight, one does not plan on getting an eating disorder. Instead, it shows up unannounced, like the overserved heckler at a comedy show. There's a part of you that anticipates its arrival, but a bigger part of you really hoped it would have just stayed home tonight. The boy she lost her virginity to wasn't memorable. Or maybe it wasn't that he wasn't memorable, but more that Caroline didn't quite remember all of it. She wanted to lose it fast, to get it over with before any of her college friends knew. She knew that Jasmine and Kelly had lost it for sure, but she wasn't sure about Jane. After 20 years of sexual deprivation, she was eager. And after she had carefully removed every thick, dark hair from the lower half of her body, she felt prickly and tender and as ready as she'd ever be. They met at a party and went home together that same night. Sam was his name, but he could have easily been named Chris, Dan, or Drew. He was average in looks and personality, and what Caroline later learned, size, too. But Sam was sweet. Sweet in the sense that he asked Caroline if it felt good 3 times during the act. Sweet in the way that he apologized after yanking on Caroline's ponytail without asking. Sam could tell that hair-pulling wasn't her thing, but he couldn't tell that this was Caroline's very first time. He would never find that out, and he wouldn't ever know that this was not only Caroline's first time, it was also her first time doing anything with a boy. He probably wouldn't even find out her last name. But Sam, like the sweet boy he was, would always give Caroline a no-teeth grin and a head nod if he were ever to see her again. After Sam, there was Jack, Nick, Brock, and 35 thrilling seconds with Richard. Each experience was similar. The level of sobriety was sketchy. The sex was strictly penetrative and mediocre at best, and the encounter was limited to physical contact, apart from some trivial conversation that occurred both before and after for courtesy purposes. Though Caroline was yet to gain an orgasm from any of these experiences, she relished the feeling of being desired. Sometimes these feelings were accompanied by inklings of regret, disgust, and loneliness, but Caroline shoved those feelings away, and instead glorified the stories of the night to her friends at dining hall brunch the next day. She felt validated by men in the same way she used to feel validated by boisterous laughs at her jokes. It almost felt as if all of her hard work paid off because of a few thrusts on a blurry Saturday night. It almost felt worth it. During one of those infamous Sunday brunches, Caroline received a Facebook message from Peter Kirshner. "Hey, Carol, how the hell are you?" it read. Caroline smiled a big, dumb smile as she read his message. Pete was one of the only guys she still thought about from high school. They weren't in the same friend group, but they had actually been pretty good friends. The two of them took improv classes downtown together, sharing the train ride for 35 minutes there and back every Thursday night from sophomore to senior year. Caroline had always liked Pete, but she never would have admitted it to him. She liked that, just like her, he had seen every episode of Saturday Night Live since the 80s, and that he had stand-up routines of his own written down in a notebook that he wouldn't ever dare perform for anyone. She liked that, unlike her, he was funny without ever being mean. Her friends quickly spotted the giddy smirk plastered across her face. Who you texting?" Jasmine asked. Caroline's face reddened. "Oh, seriously, it's no one. Just my guy friend from high school. Actually, totally randomly hit me up." "Guy friend, sure. I see you getting red, girl," Jane said. Her friends were right, even though she always got red when being put on the spot nowadays. She responded quickly, and after a few Facebook messages, Caroline offered Pete her number. Pete didn't hide the fact that he was hitting on Caroline. When Pete told Caroline he was going to DePauw, Caroline pretended she didn't know, but for whatever reason, he seemed genuinely surprised to find out that Caroline was attending school just minutes away from him. He voiced his enthusiasm over this discovery with a text to her, "Damn, I didn't even know, that's crazy," and finally asked her if she'd meet him for dinner. She responded almost immediately, but tried to make it sound like she was simply agreeing to go rather than enthusiastically accepting his offer. It was never easy for Caroline to pick out an outfit, but tonight was especially hard. Her room was always a fucking mess. Clothes were strewn across the floor, and were often ones she'd tried on, hated the way they felt on her body, and angrily tossed to the ground. "How about this one?" Jane fished through the tops that were hanging in Caroline's closet and picked out a black velvet tank. Too much, I think." This was the 5th top that Caroline had rejected of Jane's suggestions. Caroline consulted her drawer for going-out tops and plucked out a lacy white off-the-shoulder top. She tossed it on with some high-waisted ripped jeans. "Okay, Caroline, it's perfect. Don't change again, I swear." This time Caroline believed Jane. She sucked in, turned to the side, back to the front, and then the other side to see every angle of her body. Damn, she thought, I look good. Caroline checked her appearance 3 more times before leaving her apartment. Her brown hair was straightened and slicked back into a ponytail, and her makeup looked doll-like, apart from her lips. She hated the way she looked with lipstick, so she coated her lips with a heavy layer of peppermint Burt's Bees instead. The Uber drive was quick, only 7 minutes total to an Italian restaurant nearby. Caroline's legs bounced up and down, a habit she couldn't kick that only worsened when she was nervous. Her driver wasn't the conversational type, thank God, as that was the last thing Caroline wanted to do. During the car ride, she reread the texts that she and Pete had exchanged leading up to the date. Pete was already waiting at the table when she walked in. He looked exactly the same. His hair was dark and greasy, but it was curly enough that the grease looked more like definition. His nose was big, but so were the rest of his facial features, so it didn't stick out too bad. He looked goonish. He was wearing a yellow flannel, and it was definitely a little underdressed. But Caroline didn't mind at all. "Damn, Carol, who are you? You look amazing, seriously." He got up from his chair to give her a huge hug. Caroline was beaming. She decided she wouldn't correct him. They sat down and had small talk and tried to break the awkwardness with jokes, but neither one was serving their best tonight. For the first time with each other, they forced laughs. "So you still doing any improv?" Pete asked. No, I just got too busy, I guess. I do miss it, though." Caroline's voice was softer and higher in pitch than Pete remembered. "Do you?" "Nah, I haven't since high school either. Same as you. Sure do miss it." Before they ordered, Pete asked Caroline if she'd been eating a lot of salads lately, which even he realized was uncomfortable almost immediately. Caroline's face reddened and searched for words as she nervously reached for her water. I'm sorry, Carol. That was a really fucking weird thing to say. I just meant that you look good, like really good. You should definitely order whatever you want." His response did not help Caroline's redness of the face, and although it was designed to be a compliment, it did not make her feel even a little bit better either. She decided on penne rosa, and also decided that it was going to come up later. Her stomach was so uneasy she thought the food might actually come up without the help of her second and third left fingers this time. It took a while for the two of them to recover from the uncomfortable comment, but they pushed through. Caroline tried her best to relax. She so wanted to feel the way she did on those train rides to class, comfortable and quick-witted, but she couldn't calm down. Her nerves wouldn't allow for her to joke with Pete like she used to. She retreated to neutral small talk and tried not to think of Pete's dumbass comment. Several long silences went by as Pete slurped down his spaghetti, while Caroline carefully cut each noodle into 2 bites. The waiter seemed to sense the awkwardness and returned to the table to check in several times until it finally felt acceptable to pay the bill and get going. Pete insisted on paying, while Caroline gave a lukewarm offer to split it, giving in to him almost instantly. Caroline decided she wasn't satisfied with this ending. On their way out the door, the two walked side by side before stopping outside the restaurant to lean against the red brick. "So I take it you're not seeing anyone right now?" Caroline asked. Not seriously, no. Just looking to fuck around. That's what this is about, right?" Pete's hand reached from the arch of Caroline's back down to the back pocket of her jeans. Caroline's heart sank. She tried to retreat subtly from his grip, took 1 step to the side, and looked down to her feet. "Don't look up. Don't look up. Don't you dare look up." Pete offered to share an Uber, a half-hearted gesture at best, but Caroline could barely respond. Her tongue was glued to the roof of her mouth, and suddenly the dryness was cured by a thick layer of mucus that entered through the very back of her throat. a humiliating consequence of both her poor immune system and the tears that were now leaking down heavy onto her cheeks. Now she struggled to speak, in fear that her words would be more like choked-out gibberish, and their efforts to produce a sound would only expose more of the green. She should really get that checked out. Mucus peering out of her nostrils. I really have to go. Come on, Carol. You did improv for like 6 years, and now you can't get out one complete sentence without sounding like a fucking 5-year-old boy trying to pronounce library for the first time? Pathetic. Except the snot wasn't nearly as visible as she thought it to be, though still very much green, and there was only a few specks of black that coated her under eyes from her mascara. She sniffled hard. Pete's face looked more confused than concerned. He extended his hand out to her bare shoulder, and suddenly Caroline was second-guessing her decision to go sleeveless. His hands felt big and balmy, and grabbed at first a little too hard before pulling away. Sorry, Carol, I don't know what to say, Pete started. I'm sorry if I said something, okay? I'm just a little confused. Caroline's sobs became more controlled now. Her eyes stayed down, though, as she knew the only way she'd be able to calm down would be if she didn't look at his face. Like I said, Carol, I'm sorry. Fuck. He stopped and looked down at his phone. Looks like my Uber's here, actually. Guess I'll see you around. Before he turned to greet the black Mazda on the corner, he bent his head down and kissed the top of her head, in between her hairline and forehead. Caroline didn't move. She couldn't move her head to watch him go. She knew he was gone. It was nearing 9 p.m. now. She sniffled once more and attempted to unlock her phone, only to realize it was dead. The walk home wasn't far, though. But with her legs so thin and her stomach so tight, she felt so cold. That was Becoming Caroline by Katrina Iorio, published in the 2018 edition of A Midwestern Review. Katrina Iorio is a senior at DePauw University in Greencastle, Indiana, majoring in English with a minor in music. She's the music director of DePauw's co-ed a cappella group and is also an assistant producer for DePauw's television station, D3TV. Iorio will join Teach for America after graduation, but she also plans to continue writing both fiction and nonfiction. Becoming Caroline is her first publication. You've been listening to Reader's Radar, a presentation of WFIU Public Radio and Indiana Public Media, recorded at the studios of WFIU Public Radio on the campus of Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. Our producer is Shane Lauder. Production director is Mark Chilla. Digital director is Eoban Binder. Executive producer is John Bailey. Music for this program is shared under Creative Commons license by the artists Lobo Loco, Audio Binger, and Maidan at freemusicarchive.org. Episodes are posted at our website, indianapublicmedia.org/readersradar, with links to more literary audio from WFIU Public Radio. I'm your host and reader, Shane Lauder. Keep listening, keep reading, keep an ear on the radar.